It must also be shown from what has been said that God did not work out of necessity in the creation of things, as if he brought things into existence out of a debt of justice. For justice, according to the Philosopher in Ethics 5, is to the other, to whom he renders his debt. But the universal production of things presupposes nothing to whom anything is owed. Therefore, the universal production of things itself could not proceed from the duty of justice. Again, since the act of justice is to render to each one what is his own, the act of justice precedes the act by which something becomes one's own, as is evident in human affairs. For by labor one deserves what is his own, which the retributor returns to himself by an act of justice. That act, therefore, by which something first becomes one's own, cannot be an act of justice. But through creation, the created thing first begins to have something of its own. Therefore, creation does not proceed from the duty of justice. In addition, no one owes anything to another, except through the fact that he in some way depends on him, or receives something from him or from another, on the basis of which he owes to the other. For thus a son is a debtor to his father, because he receives his being from him. The master of the servant, because he receives from him the servant whom he needs. Every man to his neighbor for the sake of God, from whom we receive all good things. But God is dependent on no one, and does not need anything to receive from another, as is clearly evident from what has been said above. Therefore God did not bring things into existence out of any obligation of justice. Further, in every genus that which is for its own sake is prior to that which is for the sake of another. Therefore, that which is simply the first among all causes is a cause for its own sake only. But what he does out of the duty of justice, he does not do for his own sake alone, for he does it for the sake of that to whom he owes it. Therefore God, being the first cause and the first agent, did not bring things into existence out of a duty of justice. Hence it is that Romans 11 it is said, "Who first gave to him, and shall be repaid to him, for from him and through him and in him are all things." And Job 41:2, "Who has given to me before that I may repay him? All that is under heaven is mine." By these things the error of some who endeavor to prove that God can do nothing but what he does, because he can do nothing but what he must, is excluded. For, as has been shown, things do not work out of the duty of justice. And although the universal production of things is preceded by nothing created to which anything can be owed, yet something uncreated precedes it, which is the principle of creation. This can be considered in two ways, for the divine goodness itself precedes as the end and the first motive to create, according to Augustine, who says, "Because God is good, we are. But his knowledge and his will precede as those by which things are brought into being. Therefore, if we consider the divine goodness itself absolutely, we find no debt in the creation of things. For it is said in one way that something is owed to someone from the order of another to him. That is to say, he must refer back to him what he has received from him, just as it is owed to a benefactor that the benefits of grace are done to him, inasmuch as he who received the benefit owes him this. However, this mode of debt has no place in the creation of things, since there is no pre-existing thing to which it may be appropriate to owe something to God, nor is there any pre-existing benefit from him. In another way, something is said to be due to someone in its own right, for this is of necessity a debt to someone that is required for its perfection, just as it is necessary for a man to have hands or strength, because without these he cannot be perfect. But divine goodness needs no external thing for its perfection. Therefore, the production of creatures is not due to him by way of necessity. Still, God brings things into being by his will, as was shown above. But it is not necessary, if God wills his goodness to be, that he wills other things to be produced by himself. For the antecedent of this conditional is necessary, but not the consequent. For it was shown in the first book that God wills his goodness out of necessity, but does not out of necessity will others. Therefore, the production of creatures is not necessarily due to divine goodness. Further, it has been shown that God brings things into existence not from the necessity of nature, nor from the necessity of knowledge, nor of will, nor of justice. Therefore, it is by no means necessary to divine goodness that things are brought into being. It may, however, be said that it is due to him by way of a certain propriety, but justice, properly so called, requires a debt of necessity, for what is rendered by justice to someone is owed to him by necessity of law. Just as therefore the production of creatures cannot be said to have been from a debt of justice to which God is the debtor of the creature, so neither is it from such a debt of justice to which he is a debtor to his own goodness, if justice is understood properly. Justice, however, broadly accepted, may be said to be justice in the creation of things, inasmuch as it conforms to divine goodness. But if we consider the divine arrangement by which God arranged by his intellect and will to bring things into existence, then the production of things proceeds from the necessity of the divine arrangement. For it cannot be that God has arranged to do something that he does not afterwards himself do. Otherwise his disposition would be either changeable or weak. Therefore it is due to his disposition that it must be fulfilled. But still, this debt is not sufficient for the account of justice, properly so called in the creation of things, in which only the action of God the Creator can be considered. But the same is not justice properly so called to himself, as is clear from the Philosopher in the fifth of Ethics. Therefore, it cannot properly be said that God brought things into existence out of a duty of justice, on the ground that he disposed himself to produce them through knowledge and will. But if the production of any creature be considered, the debt of justice may be found there by comparing the latter creature with the former. But I say the former, not only in time, but in nature. Therefore, there is no debt to be found in the production of the first divine effects. In the production of the latter, however, debt is found, but in a different order. For if those things which are naturally prior are also prior in being, the latter derive a debt from the former. For it is a debt that, having established causes, they have actions by which they produce effects. But if things which are naturally prior are later in being, then conversely the former derive a debt from the latter, just as medicine must be preceded by a debt in order that health may result. But in both cases this common thing exists, that the debt or necessity is taken from that which is before nature, in regard to that which is nature afterwards. Now the necessity which is posterior to existence, though it be first in nature, is not an absolute necessity, but a conditional one. So that if this should be done, it is necessary that this should be first. Therefore, according to this necessity, in the production of creatures, debt is found threefold. First, that a conditional debt be assumed from the whole universe of things to every part of it which is required for the perfection of the universe. For if God willed such a universe to be made, it was necessary for him to make the sun and the moon, and such things without which the universe cannot exist. Secondly, that the debt of condition may be taken from one creature to another, so that if God willed animals and plants to exist, it was necessary for him to make the heavenly bodies from which they are preserved. And if he wanted to be a man, he had to make plants and animals and other such things which a man needs to be perfect, although God did both this and that out of mere will. Thirdly, that in each creature a conditional debt is assumed from its parts and properties and accidents, on which the creature depends insofar as it exists, or insofar as it attains some perfection of its own. He would unite with it and provide him with senses and other aids of this kind, both intrinsic and extrinsic, in all of which, if rightly attended to, God is not said to be a debtor to the creature, but to fulfill his disposition. On the supposition that God wished to make man, it was due from this supposition that he should unite soul and body in him, and provide him with senses and other aids of this kind, both intrinsic and extrinsic, in all of which, if rightly attended to, God is not said to be a debtor to the creature, but to fulfill his disposition. On the supposition that God wished to make man, it was due from this supposition that he should unite soul and body in him, and provide him with senses and other aids of this kind, both intrinsic and extrinsic, in all of which, if rightly attended to, God is not said to be a debtor to the creature, but to fulfill his disposition. Now another mode of necessity is found in the nature of things, according to which something is said to be absolutely necessary. This necessity depends on the previous causes of being, just as on essential principles and on efficient or moving causes. But this mode of necessity cannot take place in the first creation of things, so far as efficient causes are concerned. For there God alone was the efficient cause, whose alone it is to create, as was shown above. But he does not work by the necessity of nature, but by his will in creating, as was shown above. Those things which are done by the will cannot have necessity, except from the mere supposition of an end, according to which it is due to the end that they be those by which the end is reached. But as far as formal or material causes are concerned, nothing prevents absolute necessity from being found even in the first creation of things. For from the fact that some bodies were composed of elements, it was necessary that they should be hot or cold. And from the fact that some surface was produced of a triangular shape, it was necessary that it should have 3 angles equal to 2 straight lines. But this necessity is according to the order of effect to the material or formal cause created. Hence, according to this, God cannot be called a debtor, but rather the debt falls on the creature of necessity. But in the propagation of things, where the efficient creature is already found, there can be an absolute necessity created by an efficient cause, just as the lower bodies are necessarily changed by the movement of the sun. Thus, therefore, from the aforesaid reasons of debt, natural justice is found in things, both as regards the creation of things and as regards their propagation. And therefore God is said to have justly and rationally founded and governed all things. Thus, therefore, by what has been said, a double error is excluded, that is, of those who, limiting the divine power, said that God could do nothing but what he does, because he must do so, and of those who say that all things follow the simple will, without any other reason being sought or assigned in things.